There is a kind of cold that has nothing to do with the weather. You know the cold I mean. The cold that hits you when someone looks at you and looks through you. Not rudely, not with contempt. Just past you, as if the space you occupy contains no one worth acknowledging. In the 18th century in London, in the February of 1743, that cold is a physical thing. It lives in the gap between what you are and what you must appear to be. It lives in the 3 inches of hem you've turned up on a dress that's too large because you bought it second-hand from a woman who was taller than you. It lives in the right glove, which has a split along the seam at the index finger that you've sewn and sewn until the thread is thicker than the fabric, and which you're wearing turned inside out today because the seam holds better that way and the split doesn't show. It lives, mostly, in a small object you've been carrying in your pocket for 2 days without using. A note, stamped with the seal of the vestry of St. Giles in the Fields. A summons, technically. An invitation, the overseers call it, with a particular kind of pleasantness that means the opposite of pleasant. You're invited to appear before the parish vestry to have your circumstances examined. Your circumstances. In 1743, your circumstances being examined means this: a room full of men who have never missed a meal looking at you, a woman who has been stretching a halfpenny loaf across 2 days, and deciding whether you are poor enough, truly poor enough, genuinely and verifiably poor enough to deserve their help. And if they decide you are, if they decide you qualify for parish relief, you will receive 1 shilling and 3 pence per week, and you will receive something else, a badge, a piece of coarse linen, roughly stitched with a letter, sewn onto your outer garment above the right breast, the letter P for pauper. Welcome to 18th century London, where the cruelest poverty isn't the kind that lets you die quietly. It's the kind that makes you wear a sign. I make these history stories, and I know some of you are listening to fall asleep and some of you are genuinely here because you want to know how people actually lived. Not the candlelit drawing rooms, not the powdered wigs and the portraits where everyone looks vaguely dissatisfied in a comfortable way. The other part, the part nobody talks about at dinner parties, then or now. Tonight we're going somewhere uncomfortable, which, given that history is mostly uncomfortable, should narrow it down a great deal. We're going to London in 1743. We're going to spend a day with someone who is trying, with great skill and increasingly desperate intensity, to not look like what she is. She is 21 years old. Her name is Sarah Hewitt. She's from Shrewsbury. She arrived in London 14 months ago with a character reference, 3 months' wages, and the reasonable expectation that a competent lady's maid with a clean record could find a new position within the month. She was wrong. This is one day in what that wrongness feels like. Get comfortable. Here we go. You wake before the light comes, not because you want to, because the woman in the bed on the other side of the partition is coughing again, that wet productive cough that hasn't stopped since November, and the partition is a single board of thin pine that does nothing to muffle sound and not much more to divide the space. The lodging house on Monmouth Street in the parish of St. Giles, which is very much its own kind of London, charges 4 pence a night for a bed to yourself, or 3 pence for a shared bed. When you arrived 14 months ago, you paid 4 pence and felt, if not quite comfortable, at least dignified. You're paying 3 pence now. The woman sharing your bed is called Mrs. Flood. She's 43, a widow, formerly a seamstress before her eyesight went. She smells of camphor and old wood smoke and something sweet underneath that might be rot. She sleeps on her side, curled small, and she doesn't cough. The coughing comes from the other side of the board. The room is cold. Not the gentle chill of autumn, not the brisk cold of a winter morning that will warm once you're moving. The specific cold of a room where the fire has been out since 10 o'clock the previous night, and it is now, by the quality of the darkness beyond the small window, somewhere around 5 in the morning. The cold that has settled into everything, into the straw of the mattress, into the wool of the blanket, into your own skin. You can see your breath. You lie there for a moment, counting the sounds. Mrs. Flood breathing. The coffin from next door. Below, faintly, a man's voice, and then another man's voice, rising and falling in an argument that started last night about a gambling debt and apparently hasn't resolved. A dog, distant. The creak of the building settling, the way old London buildings creak constantly, as though they are slowly thinking about falling over and haven't quite committed. And underneath all of this, the smell. You've mostly stopped noticing it, which is its own kind of horror when you think about it. But sometimes, in the first few seconds after waking, before your brain adjusts, you catch it again and remember what it was like to smell a room and find it neutral. It is the smell of many people in a small space, of tallow candles burned down to nothing, leaving a greasy, sweetish residue in the air, of the open gutter in the street below, which in February carries a specific combination of kitchen waste and human waste, and the particular contribution of the livestock that pass through Monmouth Street on the way to market, of damp wool, of bodies that wash when there is water, and when there is soap, and when there is time, which is to say, irregularly, of your own hair, which you washed 6 days ago, and which, in this air, cannot be kept as clean as you want it. You get up. Getting dressed takes longer than it should, not because you have a great deal to put on, because what you have must be put on correctly. This is the part nobody explains to you when you're growing up, learning to dress a merchant's wife, learning the importance of presentation. Nobody explains that all of that knowledge will one day apply to yourself and will matter desperately, the way matters of survival always matter when you finally understand that's what they are. The shift first, the one you slept in, which you will wear all day. It was white when you bought it. It is now a colour that might charitably be called ivory, which is a polite way of describing the result of washing in cold water with cheap soap and hanging to dry in London air. You inspect it in the dim light. The fabric is still sound at the shoulders. The cuffs are wearing thin. Nothing to be done about that today. The stays. These are your best item. Good whalebone stays, well made from before. From before everything. You tightened them last week because they were growing loose, which tells you something about the last 14 months that you prefer not to dwell on. But they give you a shape. They give you a posture. In the stays, you stand like a woman who has somewhere to be and is equal to whatever it is. That is not nothing. Stockings, darned at both heels, but the darning is invisible under the shoes. This matters because the stockings are the first thing visible below the hem of the dress. If the stockings are clean and unladdered, a woman looks respectable. If they are not, no dress in the world will help. The petticoats, 2 of them, which in February is necessity before it is modesty. The outer one is a dark green wool, purchased for 10 shillings at a second-hand sale in Rag Fair, when you still had 10 shillings to spend. The original owner was taller than you. The hem pooled when you first put it on, but you spent a weekend turning it up and pressing the new hem flat with a smoothing stone. Now it sits correctly. It is slightly too wide at the waist, which you address with a pin at the back of the waistband, hidden under the gown. The gown. Dark blue wool, similar provenance to the petticoat purchased the same day. The fabric is good, was good once. Now the elbows are slightly shiny from use. You know this. You keep your arms at your sides when you can. The apron. Clean white linen. Pressed. This is the one item you have maintained with absolute ferocity. An apron that is clean and well pressed tells a specific story. It says that the woman wearing it is a working woman. Yes, but a respectable working woman. A servant. A woman with standards. It's the difference between being seen as looking for honest work and being seen as something else entirely. The apron is always clean. The cap, white linen, modest. You have two. This one has a slight discoloration at the back where tallow dripped months ago. You've washed it 6 times. The discoloration doesn't show when the cap is on your head and your back is to a wall. And finally the gloves. You hold them for a moment before putting them on. They were good gloves once. Kid leather, pale grey, from the wardrobe of Mrs. Pemberton, who was your mistress in Shrewsbury, who died in October of 1741, whose household was broken up in the months afterward, who left you with a character reference that called you industrious and honest, and of good appearance and manners, and 3 months' wages, and these gloves, and the knowledge that good appearance and manners, as it turns out, do not prevent a woman from being slowly erased by a city that has no particular use for her. The right glove has the split at the index finger. You put it on inside out. The split is on the palm side now, invisible. You will keep your right hand slightly closed today. Not fully fisted, that would look strange. Just slightly curled, the natural position of a hand at rest. You've been doing this for 6 weeks. You barely notice anymore. You put on the left glove. You look at your reflection in the small piece of mirror that Mrs. Flood keeps wedged against the window frame. What you see is a woman who looks like a servant between positions. Neat, composed, not wealthy, not obviously poor, respectable. What the mirror cannot show you is the 2-shilling piece in your skirt pocket, the last you have in the world, or the note from the vestry, folded small, tucked against your stays, or the 3 weeks' rent you owe Mr. Jarvis, the lodging-house keeper, who's been patient longer than you had any right to expect. What the mirror cannot show you is that if the vestry decides against you this afternoon, you will be asked to leave London, remove to your parish of settlement, back to Shrewsbury, where you haven't lived since you were 15 and where you know no one any longer, and where a woman returning alone and penniless from London is only one thing in the eyes of a small market town. You turn from the mirror, time to go, Monmouth Street in February. And when I say Monmouth Street, I need you to understand what that means in 1743. This is not a fashionable street, or a market street, or any street that anyone with money would mention in polite company. Monmouth Street is the street of old clothes, the second-hand trade. Both sides of the road are lined with shops that deal in used garments, coats and dresses and breeches and stays and stockings and shoes and hats, all of it arranged in great tumbling displays that hang from upper windows and dangle above doorways and spread across trestle tables set out on the pavement. The smell of it, on a cold morning, is cloth and old sweat and the particular sharp smell of camphor, which the dealers use to keep moths out of the wool. You know this street well now. You have bought things here, sold things here, stood in those shops turning garments over in your hands, feeling for the integrity of the seams, checking the collars and cuffs for wear, calculating whether the repair work needed would take more time than the garment was worth. The man outside the third shop from the corner is called Mr. Levi. You've spoken to him twice. He is a careful trader, precise about quality, and he once showed you how to identify a wool that's been treated to look heavier than it is. You press it and hold it, and if it springs back slowly, the nap has been raised artificially, and the fabric will wear thin within a season. You walk past without stopping, not because you don't need anything, because if you look, you will want to buy, and you have 2 shillings and rent owed and nothing else. The streets fill early despite the cold. London fills its streets before the sun is properly up because London has no patience for sleep. Carts clatter past, bringing goods from the market gardens east of the city. A coal merchant's cart goes by, the coal mounded in rough sacks, the merchant himself walking alongside with his face black to the eyebrows. A woman with a basket balanced on her head, moving through the crowd with the particular floating walk of someone who's carried weight on their head since childhood. She sells hot pies from the basket. The smell is extraordinary, fat and gravy and something savoury, and your stomach responds with an embarrassing urgency. You ate yesterday, a penny loaf, divided into thirds, morning, noon, evening. You will eat today. That is a thought for later. You turn north, away from Monmouth Street, toward the church, toward the vestry. But first there is the rest of the morning to get through. The vestry is at 3 o'clock. It is not yet 6. 9 hours of today must pass before you can know the outcome, and you will not spend 9 hours in your room at Mr. Jarvis's staring at the ceiling. You have errands. Practical, necessary, humiliating errands. First, the registry office. Here is what a registry office is if you don't know. Registry offices for domestic servants are a relatively new institution in 1743. They exist to connect servants looking for positions with households looking for servants. A servant goes to the registry, pays a small fee, usually 6pence, and their name and experience are recorded in a ledger. Households pay a similar fee to examine the lists and identify candidates. In theory, it is efficient. In practice, the registry is a room in which you will discover in very concentrated form exactly where you stand in the world. The registry office near Covent Garden is down a passage off one of the side streets, not the main road, not the fashionable side, the other side. The door is plain wood with a brass handle that someone polishes, which is the only concession to appearance the whole establishment makes. Inside, the room is narrow and smells of coal fire and damp wool. Benches along the walls. You take the last space on the bench nearest the door, fold your hands in your lap and wait. The women on the benches are all, like you, between positions. You find yourself doing the thing you do, reading them. The habit of service teaches you to place people instantly by their dress and bearing and manner. It's an occupational skill, useful when your livelihood depends on understanding the household you're applying to. Here, it is less useful, more painful. The woman 2 down from you is wearing good black wool, morning dress slightly faded at the cuffs, which means she's been wearing it long enough that the mourning period is probably over, and this is simply her best dress now. A cook or a housekeeper, you think, middle-aged, experienced, better placed in the hierarchy of service than you, more valuable to any household. The girl at the end of the bench is 15 at most, frightened. Her dress is plain and newish. She's come directly from somewhere rural. from someone who told her London was full of opportunities. She keeps looking at the door as though calculating the distance, and next to you, just next to you, a woman your age, your general height, wearing a dress that is almost exactly the same shade of dark blue as your own. She looks at your dress. You look at hers. You both look away. There is an entire conversation in that exchange that neither of you will ever have out loud. The clerk calls names from his ledger. Each woman goes up, speaks quietly, is told something, and either leaves or returns to the bench. You watch the ones who return. The ones who leave first always look like they have somewhere to be. The ones who return have the look of women who are going to be on this bench for a while longer than they'd hoped. You're on this bench for 3 hours. When your name is called, you go up to the desk. The clerk is a man of about 40, with spectacles and the careful manner of someone who has had a great many awkward conversations and has made his peace with having them. Sarah Hewitt, lady's maid. Yes. Character from Mrs. Pemberton of Shrewsbury, deceased. He reads from your entry. Arrived London, he squints. November last year. This is wrong. You came in December of 1741. But you have learned that correcting clerks is generally not a good use of goodwill. Yes, you say, and you've had no position since. The word since does a great deal of work in that sentence. It implies something. It sits on the desk between you like a small, insulting object. I had a position with Mrs. Alderton in Suffolk from January to June of last year. She reduced her household. The clerk finds the relevant entry. Yes, 6 months. And before that, 3 weeks with the Fortescue family. They left London, he makes note. You watch his pen move and think about what he is writing. You think about what your file looks like from the outside, a string of short positions, households that broke up or reduced or departed, nothing long-term, nothing that would make you look reliable, that would make you look like someone worth the trouble of training up to a household's particular ways, none of it your fault, all of it your fault, in the way that the ledger reads it. We have openings currently, the clerk says, in the tone that means what follows will not be helpful, for scullery maids in several households, and a laundry maid's position in a house in Bloomsbury. Scullery maid. You were a lady's maid. You dressed a woman, managed her personal wardrobe, styled her hair, accompanied her in public, wrote letters for her when her eyes were bad. You know which fabrics spot and which hold colour. You know how to arrange hair in 4 different fashions and which fashion suits which face shape. You know how to manage a personal budget and handle a wardrobe inventory and identify quality in a dozen different textiles by touch alone, in the dark, without looking. Scullery maid. A scullery maid is 13 years old. A scullery maid scrubs pots and peels vegetables and sleeps in the coldest corner of the kitchen and earns £3 a year. You take a breath through your nose. Are there any positions as a lady's maid or a parlour maid? Even a... Not on our current list, the clerk says. Might you add my name to any future? Your name is already on the list, Miss Hewitt. And then, carefully, with the particular kindness of someone who is being kind because kindness costs him nothing, I would encourage you to consider the options available. You understand. You understand what he is not saying. You're 21. You're between positions. You have been between positions with only brief interruptions for 14 months. In the logic of service, in the mathematics of hiring decisions, this means something, not something fair, not something true necessarily, but something that matters to the people who will look at your record. Thank you, you say. You take your hands from the desk, gloves still on, right hand slightly curled. You walk back through the room without looking at the women on the benches. Outside, on the street, the cold hits you like a physical thing. You stand for a moment in the doorway, not going in and not going forward, while the street moves around you. Carts and chairmen and a man with a tray of muffins and a woman with a child on her hip and a boy running with a message. Nobody looks at you. Nobody sees you standing in a doorway in the cold, in your turned inside-out gloves, with your apron pressed and your cap straight, and your 2-shilling piece in your pocket, calculating. Calculating the walk to the pawnbroker, calculating what time you have before the vestry appointment at 3 o'clock, calculating how many days 2 shillings buys you in Mr. Jarvis's lodging house. 3.5 days. You push away from the doorway and start walking. The pawnbroker's shop is in a street near Holborn, 3 balls hanging above the door. You've been in twice before, once to pawn a silver thimble that belonged to Mrs. Pemberton, and that you had carried in your work-box so long that you'd stopped thinking of it as hers and started thinking of it as yours, which is the kind of thinking that happens to people who have no things of their own. The thimble got you 8p. The second time, you pawned a handkerchief with embroidered initials, given to you by a cousin at Christmas the year before you left Shrewsbury. You got 4p for it, and felt the loss longer and more painfully than the thimble, which tells you something about value and objects and grief that you haven't fully worked out. Today, you're pawning the last good thing. You keep it in the bottom of your small trunk, wrapped in the same paper. It came in when Mrs. Pemberton's daughter gave it to you when the household was broken up. It's a small tortoise-shell comb, real tortoise-shell, warm brown with amber inclusions, made to sit in the hair as decoration. Not enormously valuable. It's not silver, not set with stones, but quality. Unmistakably quality. You've been carrying it all morning in your pocket. You push open the door. The bell above it is one of those sounds that, once you've heard it in this context, will always mean one specific thing. Not a church bell, not a shopkeeper's bell. The bell of the pawnbroker, which sounds exactly the same as any other bell and yet sounds completely different. The shop smells of dust and old metal and the faint sweetness of whatever the previous customer left behind. The counter is high and broad, and behind it, on shelves from floor to ceiling, are the pledges, hundreds of them. Clocks and coats and swords and candlesticks and shoes and watches and musical instruments and entire bolts of fabric and things you can't identify from here. The pawnbroker himself is younger than you expected, maybe 30, stocky, with careful eyes that have already assessed you in the time it took you to cross from the door to the counter. He's assessed your dress, your posture, your gloves, your purpose. You know this because it is exactly what you would do in his position. Good morning, you say. Morning. You set the comb on the counter. He doesn't pick it up immediately. He looks at it. Then he looks at you. Then he picks it up with 2 fingers and holds it toward the light from the window. You watch his face. This is the specific cruelty of the pawnbroker encounter. You're entirely dependent on his judgment, and his judgment will emerge from his face as a number that you cannot argue with except in small incremental ways, and arguing too hard will only make him lower the offer on principle. He turns the comb over. Tortoiseshell, you say, because saying something demonstrates that you know what you have. It's good quality. You can see the thickness of the plate. I can see it. He sets the comb down. 6p. You had prepared yourself for this. You had, in the walk from Holborn, rehearsed several versions of yourself accepting several different numbers with dignity, but sixpence is lower than the lowest version. It's worth considerably more than, to the right buyer, yes. He folds his hands on the counter. I'm not the right buyer, miss. I'm a broker. I take pledges and hold them, and if you come back within, shall we say, 6 months, and redeem it, you have your comb and I have my interest. If you don't redeem it, I sell it. I won't get more than £1 for it. Maybe 18 pence if I'm patient. 6 now. 3 interest at 6 months. That's my offer. 8, you say. He looks at you. You look at him. You're aware that you're standing in a pawnbroker's shop on a February morning negotiating over a tortoiseshell comb while wearing inside-out gloves and owing 3 weeks' rent, with a note from the parish vestry sitting against your stays, and the whole situation has a quality that is almost funny if you look at it from very far away. You're not looking at it from very far away. 8, he says. He counts out 8 from a drawer. You take it. You pick up the comb, and just for 1 second you hold it. The tortoiseshell is warm. Surprisingly warm for cold February. It has that quality of old things, the warmth of having been touched by hands for a long time, many hands, many years, the warmth of being kept. You put it back on the counter. He gives you a ticket. You fold it and put it in your pocket with the vestry note, and you walk out into the cold. Outside you stand on the pavement and add up the arithmetic. 8 from the comb, plus your 2 piece, minus the rent owed to Mr. Jarvis. The sum comes to an amount that is not enough for any calculation to come out well. And it is 11:15, 3 hours and 45 minutes before the vestry. You walk. This is something you have learned about this city. When everything is bad, walking helps. Not because it changes anything, because it moves your body through space, which gives your mind something concrete to do. You walk east along High Holborn and then south into the tangle of streets between Covent Garden and the Strand. This is not the most direct route to anything. That's not the point. The streets here are mixed in the way that only London is mixed, which is to say, completely. A milliner's shop next to a second-hand clothes dealer, next to a printer's, next to a cook shop, next to a tavern, next to a house subdivided so many times that you can count 7 separate families in a space built for one. Above the ground floor of almost every building, laundry hangs between windows on lines strung across the street, frozen stiff in the cold, shifting when a cart passes and sets the air moving. The cooking smells are specific and layered. The hot, fat smell of a chop house, the sharp brightness of apples sold from a barrow, the warm yeast of a baker's, the meaty richness from a boiling house where they render tallow. You're hungry, not faint hungry, honestly hungry, the way your body gets when it has been managing on insufficient food long enough that hunger has become a background condition. Like the cold, like the noise. You notice it in how your attention goes to food smells, how your eyes track the hands of the woman eating a piece of bread in a doorway as you pass. The baker near the top of the street has penny loaves in the window. You have 6 still in your pocket from the pawned comb. You could buy a loaf. You walk past. Not yet. After the vestry. If the vestry goes badly, a penny loaf will be one of your last purchases. Better to have the money still in hand. You walk south, toward the river, just to have a direction. The Thames appears at the end of a long street in snatches. Grey water, grey sky, the familiar forest of masts in the Pool of London, ships from half the world waiting to unload. A coal barge moving downstream, low in the water, so loaded that the waterline is frighteningly close to the gunwale. You've stood on London Bridge exactly once, 7 months ago on a Sunday when the weather was fine and you had briefly, entirely unearned, felt something like okay about things. You'd looked at the city from the middle of the bridge and felt something you didn't have a word for at the time. You have a word for it now. Relief. The brief, entirely unearned relief of seeing something large enough to make your own situation look small. You cannot afford the time to go to London Bridge today. You turn back north, toward St. Giles, toward the vestry. Here is the thing about being poor in 18th century London that nobody in Mayfair wants to think about. Poverty has a geography. The rich and the poor don't just live differently, they live in different worlds that happen to share the same streets. The gap between them is not merely financial, it is architectural, sensory, atmospheric. St. Giles is, in 1743, one of the most densely populated parishes in London, one of the most dangerous, one of the most despised by the people who write pamphlets about the poor and commission paintings of the poor and make decisions about the poor from comfortable rooms a short coach ride away. St. Giles is where gin lives, not metaphorically, literally. The gin shops here, and there are more gin shops in this parish than there are in most towns, operate at all hours, charging a halfpenny or a penny for enough gin to make you forget, briefly, the conditions of your life. You've never bought gin, not because you have a moral objection. You're 21, and the morality of gin seems, in your current circumstances, less pressing than the morality of the vestry's decision-making process. But because gin makes your face look wrong, makes your eyes soft and unfocused, makes you look like someone who has given up, and you have not given up. A gin shop is open on the corner of one of the small courts running off the main road. A woman is sitting on the step, not asleep, but not entirely present, a cup held loosely in both hands. Her dress is good quality once. You can see it, the ghost of good fabric underneath the ground in grime. She was someone once, or she had something once. You walk faster, not because you're afraid of her, because you're afraid of the recognition in looking at her too long. The vestry of St. Giles in the Fields meets in a room attached to the church. The church itself is newer than it looks, rebuilt in the 1730s to a design that has the composed authority of a building comfortable with itself. Stone, columns, a tower that stands above the surrounding streets with what might be described as composure, if buildings can be composed. Around the church, the churchyard. In the far corner, a patch of ground without markers where they bury the ones who died in the workhouse. You don't know this yet. You find out later. But you can feel something about the yard as you walk through it that you can't account for. A heaviness, a density. It might be the cold or the grey sky or the quality of the light, which in February in London has the particular quality of not really being light at all, more like a reduction in the depth of the darkness. The room where the vestry meets is through a door on the north side of the church. A churchwarden is standing at the door. He looks at your summons, nods, and tells you to wait inside. The room is low-ceilinged and cold, and smells of old wood and tobacco, and the cold wax of church candles. There are benches along the walls and a table at the far end where, in an hour or so, 3 men will sit. There are 2 other women in the room. One is old, 60 at least, bent, with hands that shake slightly at rest. She sits with her hands folded in her lap, and stares at the floor with the stillness of someone who's been still in hard places before. The other is younger, late 20s, a baby on her lap, quiet, with the slight glassiness of a baby who has been fed but not quite enough. The mother looks at you when you come in. You look at her. Neither of you says anything. You take a seat. The vestry meeting doesn't begin for another hour. You sit in the cold room with two strangers and the smell of old wood and wait. And while you wait, you think about what you're going to say. They come in at 3 o'clock. 3 men, in coats of varying quality, taking seats at the table with the unhurried manner of men who have other things to do and are doing this as civic duty, and will not let you forget either fact. The one in the middle is the overseer of the poor for the parish. He is perhaps 50, square-faced, with the particular look of a man who has heard every story and believes perhaps a third of them. His name is Mr. Croft. To his left, a vestryman, a draper by trade, who looks at the 3 of you with polite neutrality. To his right, a clerk, young, with ink on his fingers and a prepared ledger. Mr. Croft looks at the 3 of you. We'll take the examination of Mrs. Hartley first. The old woman stands and makes her way with difficulty to the chair in front of the table. You watch. Mrs. Hartley is a widow. Her husband was a cordwainer. He died in November. She has lived in this parish for 22 years. She is asking for weekly out relief, money to supplement what she can earn from her needlework, which her hands are making increasingly impossible. Mr. Croft listens. He asks questions in a voice that is not unkind but is very precise. Where did you live before? What was your husband's settlement? Can you produce evidence of settlement? What can you earn? What do you own? What do you own? Mrs. Hartley owns 1 bed, 1 blanket, 2 chairs, a pot, a pan, several items of clothing. She lists them in a voice completely without inflection, the voice of someone who has cut the emotion out of the fact because the emotion has nowhere to go and does not help. Mr. Croft makes a note. We'll be in contact, Mrs. Hartley. Mrs. Hartley stands and returns to her bench. You look at her face. There is nothing in it. It has been smoothed clean. You make a note of this somewhere in the back of your mind. The young woman with the baby next. A widow, too. Husband lost at sea. Settlement in the parish through her husband. She has a trade. Embroidery, plain sewing. She sold the household effects for the rent arrears. Mr. Croft asks whether she is considered indoor relief. She says she hasn't. And here Mr. Croft pauses. He looks at her for a moment. Indoor relief is the workhouse. She is not going to the workhouse with her baby. He nods, makes another note. Says the out relief will be arranged. She thanks him. She stands. She goes back to the bench with the baby on her shoulder, and you see her press her face briefly into his hair, which might be relief and might be something more complicated and is definitely private. Miss Hewitt. You stand. Your legs are steady. This is important, and you know it. You walk to the chair in front of the table and sit down and fold your hands in your lap and look at Mr. Croft. He looks at your papers. He looks at your entry in the ledger. Sarah Hewitt, lady's maid, settlement in Shrewsbury, parish of St. Mary's. Yes, sir. And you're applying to this parish for... I am requesting that the parish consider whether my circumstances qualify for assistance, you say. Pending finding a new position, sir. I have been at the registry office. I have applied to several households. I expect... You've been in London 14 months, Mr. Croft says, looking at the ledger. Yes, sir. In those 14 months you have held 3 positions, the longest of which was 6 months. Yes, sir. None of them long enough to establish settlement in any London parish. No, sir. So your settlement remains in Shrewsbury. Yes, sir. Mr. Croft looks at you with an expression that is not unkind and not kind. It is the expression of a man doing an administrative job with reasonable competence. Miss Hewitt, I'll be direct with you. This parish provides relief to the poor of this parish. It does not, in the strict sense, provide relief to those whose settlement lies elsewhere. He lets that sit for a moment. However, there is discretion in cases of evident need, where removal would cause hardship, and where the individual can demonstrate a reasonable prospect of re-establishment. You wait. Can you demonstrate such a prospect? You think about what you actually have. The registry office, your name on a list, an invitation to consider scullery positions, the clerk's polite face. You think about what you must say. I have current registration at 2 registry offices. I have a character reference from my last position. I am in good health and capable of working in any household capacity. I have skills above the ordinary level for... You are a lady's maid, Mr. Croft says. The difficulty with ladies' maids, Miss Hewitt, is that they are somewhat dependent on there being a lady to attend. He says this without humour, just as a fact. The vestryman on his left has the expression of a man suppressing a smile. You decide that you dislike the vestryman. Yes, sir, you say. I've been considering that. I'm willing to take a lower position. I'm willing to work as a parlour maid, or a cook's assistant, or in any household position that has a vacancy. I have experience that includes managing wardrobes, household scheduling, basic accounts, sewing, hair. He makes a note. Not an encouraging note, just a note. You owe rent. 3 weeks, 1 shilling per week. Funds currently, 2 shillings and 8 pence. The clerk writes this down. You own. You list what you own. 1 trunk, clothing, a sewing kit, a book of psalms, a tin box with your papers. Mr. Croft confers with the vestryman in a voice too low to hear. You sit. The clock on the wall ticks. Outside, through the high window, the light is failing. February afternoon going grey around the edges. You can hear the sounds of the street. A cart, someone's voice, the particular noise that London makes at all times. Mr. Croft looks up. Miss Hewitt, the parish will provide temporary relief on the following conditions. He reads from his notes. 1 shilling and 3 pence per week, paid on Wednesdays at the overseer's office. You will register with the overseer each Wednesday before receiving payment. You will present yourself for employment assessment each month. Relief will continue for 12 weeks, at which point your case will be reviewed. 1 shilling and 3 pence, less than a scullery maid earns, less than the cost of a bed at Mr. Jarvis's, but something, real money, the difference between 3 days and 3 weeks. Thank you, you say. There is one further condition. Here it is. Recipients of parish out-relief are required to wear the parish badge, Mr. Croft says. He says it with the same even tone he's used for everything else. A cloth badge, letter P, worn above the right breast on the outer garment when appearing at public. The clock ticks. The fading light falls through the window at a particular angle and illuminates a section of the wooden floor. Yes, sir, you say. The clerk opens a small box to one side of the table. He takes out a piece of cloth, rough linen, perhaps 3 inches square, with a black stitched letter sewn onto it. He holds it out to you. You take it. It is heavier than it should be. It is lighter than it should be. It is just a piece of cloth with a letter on it, and it is the heaviest thing you have held in 14 months. You may attach it when you leave, the clerk says, which is the only kindness in the entire proceeding, and you are grateful for it in a way you cannot express and do not try to. You fold the cloth badge, you put it in your pocket, you stand, you thank Mr. Croft, you thank the clerk, you do not thank the vestry man, you walk to the door. Outside, in the churchyard, the cold is immediate and total. You walk to the wall farthest from the door, the old stone wall along the north side with the grass brown and frozen at its base, and you stand there. The other women come out behind you. Mrs. Hartley first, moving slowly, holding something small in her hand, her own badge. The young woman with the baby second, and she already has hers attached, pinned quickly in the room while you were in your examination, the P visible at her left breast rather than her right, which suggests she did it by feel in a hurry. The three of you stand in the churchyard for a moment, not quite looking at each other. Then Mrs. Hartley walks away, around the north side of the church toward whatever comes next for her. The young woman, you don't know her name and she doesn't know yours, and somehow this is a kindness. The young woman looks at you for a moment with the baby on her shoulder. He is awake and watching the world with the uncomprehending attention of a 5-month-old. She nods at you. You nod back. She walks away. You take the badge out of your pocket. In your training, your years in Mrs. Pemberton's household, you learned about something called bearing. Bearing was how you stood in a room, how you moved, how you managed your face and body so that the impression you made was the one you intended. Mrs. Pemberton was a great believer in it. The fundamental skill, she called it. More important than sewing or dressing or any practical knowledge. You square your shoulders. You take the badge and pin it to the front of your gown, above the right breast. The pin goes through the wool and the linen beneath, and you press it flat. You look down at it. The letter P, stitched in black on rough linen. You are still you. Your dress is still the same dress. Your apron is still clean. Your cap is still straight. Your gloves, your inside-out split-fingered kid leather gloves from the wardrobe of a dead woman, are still on your hands. You square your shoulders again. You walk out of the churchyard onto the street. Here is what happens. Nothing happens. You walk out and nobody stops. Nobody points. Nobody turns. The street continues doing what it was doing before, which is being a street in London in February 1743. Busy and cold and entirely indifferent to you. This should be a relief. It isn't, because the badge doesn't change what other people see, not immediately, not obviously. It changes what you see, which is yourself wearing a badge. Yourself as a woman who is officially, legally, documented as unable to support herself. Yourself as what the pamphlets call the deserving poor, which is a phrase that manages to contain both a very small amount of compassion and a very large amount of judgment in only 3 words. You walk north, toward Monmouth Street. A woman passes you going south, middle-aged, well-dressed, the wife of someone in trade. Her eyes go to your chest, just briefly, just a flicker, and then away, and she is past you. She saw it. You feel the flush rise up your neck. The specific heat of being seen as something, then anger, the specific heat of that. Because you are not a pauper, you are a person who has been in London for 14 months and worked every position that offered itself and lost 3 of them to circumstances entirely outside your control, and who is standing in this street in gloves that used to belong to a dead woman, with 8 pence in her pocket and a badge on her chest, and who is going to go back to Mr. Jarvis's and pay him 1 shilling out of the 2.5 shillings she has, and go back to the registry office on Monday and Wednesday, and the week after that until someone somewhere says yes. This is not defeat. This is Tuesday. You keep walking. You do not go directly home. There is something in you after the vestry that cannot face the lodging house yet, cannot face Mr. Jarvis's polite face and the smell of the building and Mrs. Flood's camphor and the partitioned room and the sound of the coughing woman. Not yet, not for another hour at least, so you walk. And you walk without quite meaning to toward the nicer part. This happens sometimes. When everything is at its worst, you find yourself walking toward the better streets, not to torture yourself exactly, or not only that, but because there is something in the contrast that clarifies things, that makes the situation concrete rather than abstract. St. James's Square is 20 minutes from St. Giles by foot. 20 minutes and an entirely different civilization. You shouldn't go. It is getting dark and it is cold and you have 8p and a badge, and you will be conspicuous in those streets in a way you won't be in Monmouth Street. You go anyway. The streets change gradually, the way the smell of the city changes depending on which direction you walk. The buildings get taller and more regular, and the facades get cleaner, and the people get better dressed, and the number of carriages increases until, by the time you are approaching St. James's Square, there are more coaches on the road than carts, which is the surest possible sign that you have crossed some invisible boundary, St. James's Square itself. You have walked past it once before, in the summer, in better circumstances, in the particular temporary better circumstances of having just been paid by Mrs. Alderton, and walking back from Suffolk with money in your pocket and something like confidence. You walked past and noticed the square and kept walking, and tonight you stop. The square is surrounded by houses. This is perhaps an inadequate description. They are not what the houses on Monmouth Street are when you call them houses. These are buildings that contain within themselves, within their stone and glass and precisely maintained facades, an entirely different conception of what a life might consist of. The windows are lit. Warm yellow light falls from the first floor windows into the street, and if you stand at the right angle you can see the interiors. Ceilings too high for any practical purpose, chandeliers blazing with what must be 50 candles each, furniture that cost more per item than Mr. Jarvis will earn in a decade. A sedan chair goes past, carried by 2 men in livery. Through the small window in the chair's side you catch a glimpse, a woman's face, pale and powdered, looking at nothing particular with an expression that contains no information about her inner life. She does not look at you. You are not there, in any sense that matters to her. A footman emerges from one of the grand houses across the square and stands at the top of the steps waiting for something. He is in full livery, coat, wig, knee breeches, the full formal costume of a man employed to be seen being employed. He stands very still, with a particular practised stillness of a professional, and you feel a complicated recognition looking at him. You know exactly what he is doing. You've done it yourself, standing correctly, being visible in the correct way, using your body and your dress as a message about the household you serve, which is also necessarily a message about yourself. He is warm, or warmer than you. His livery is wool and his shoes are good, and he ate this morning, you'd be willing to bet, in a kitchen that has a fire that doesn't go out. He catches you looking. His gaze passes over you with a completeness that is almost impressive. Not contempt exactly, just the recognition. instant unconscious of someone who has assessed your status and found nothing worth pausing on. His eyes go back to the street. You look down at the badge on your chest. Then you turn and walk back the way you came. There is a woman on the corner of Monmouth Street who has been there every evening for 3 weeks now. You know this because you see her every time you walk this way after dark. She sits on an overturned pail just outside the shadow of the overhang above the rope shop, so that she's sheltered but visible, and she sells matches. Lucifers, she calls them, though that's not yet the word. These are the sulphur-tipped matches that you strike on a rough surface, the smell of them sharp and chemical, the light they make brief and bright and slightly strange. She is perhaps 60. Hard to tell, poverty ages people and the cold ages them faster. Her face is deeply lined. Her clothes are layered, many layers, worn all at once for warmth, which gives her a bulky, self-contained look, like a person who has constructed their own shelter from available materials. She holds out a small bundle of matches when she sees you approaching. Matches, love. Penny for 10. Not tonight, you say. Cold night. You'll want a light. She's right that it's cold. The temperature has dropped another notch in the last hour. Your breath comes in small white clouds and your fingers inside the gloves are beginning to ache. That deep bone ache of cold that means you've been out too long. I have matches, you say, which is true. You start to move past her. You're in Mrs. Flood's room, the woman says. You stop. She's looking at you with the alert, specific attention of someone who keeps close track of their neighbourhood. I've seen you going in, she says. Top floor, left side. Yes. She's a good woman, Mrs. Flood. Hard times for her lately. She looks at your chest, at the badge, without any change in expression. Hard times for a lot of people lately. There is nothing in her voice when she says it that is pity. It is just an observation, a statement of fact that includes you without reducing you to only that fact. Yes, you say. They treating you fairly, the vestry? Fairly enough. She makes a small sound. They do their job, some of them better than others. She shifts on the pail, resettles herself. First time? On the parish? Yes. It gets easier. And then, before you can decide how to take that, I don't mean the money gets better or the work gets easier. I mean you stop being surprised by it. Surprise is exhausting. You look at her. She looks back at you with the clear eyes of someone who's been surprised by nothing for a long time. I'm Margaret Beale, she says. Been on Monmouth Street 15 years. Sarah Hewitt, 14 months. Where from? Shrewsbury. She nods as though Shrewsbury explained something. Lady's maid, by the look of you. That's a hard trade for a single woman without a household to grow into. Yes, you can sew. Plain sewing and fine work both. Can you do alterations? Taking in, letting out, hemming? Yes. She looks at you for a moment with the considering expression of someone working through something. There's a woman on the next street, Mrs. Carver, does alterations and repairs, gets more work than she can handle herself, winter months especially, people wanting their wool coats refitted, doesn't pay much. She pauses, pays something. You take this in. This is not the breakthrough. This is not the position that will change everything. This is a woman who sells matches telling you about a woman who does alterations, and the sum of it is maybe 6pence a day and work. You could do without a reference and without a registry, and without anyone examining your circumstances or asking about your settlement. Which street, you say? Turn left at the corner. Blue door, second house on the right. Tell her Margaret sent you. She picks up her bundle of matches. She'll make you prove you can sew before she takes you on. Bring your needle and thread. Thank you, you say, and you mean it, which is not always the case when you say it. She waves you off. Go home, girl. It's cold. Mr. Jarvis is in his little room off the front hall when you come in, keeping his accounts by a candle that's down to the last inch. He is a small, compact man of about 55, with the careful face of someone who has spent his life extending small amounts of credit to people who sometimes paid him back. He keeps a clean house and a fair price, and he has not mentioned the overdue rent in 3 days, which is either generosity or calculation, and you genuinely cannot tell which. You stop in his doorway. Mr. Jarvis, he looks up. I have the vestry's arrangement, you say. I can give you 1 shilling now and the remainder on Wednesday. He looks at you for a moment. His eyes go, very briefly, to the badge at your breast. Then they come back to your face. That'll do, he says. You put the shilling on the edge of his desk. He picks it up. He makes an entry in his ledger. He gives you a small nod. Supper's been, he says. There's bread on the table if you want it. You want it. Thank you, you say. You mean that too. In the kitchen, a low dark room at the back of the house where Mr. Jarvis's wife does her cooking, there is half a loaf of bread and a pot of something cooling on the hob. You cut yourself a slice of the bread and ladle a small amount of whatever is in the pot into a bowl. It is a kind of soup, mostly water, with something that was probably a bone at some point, and a few pieces of turnip gone soft and 1 shred of what might be mutton. The bread is yesterday's, gone hard at the crust. You eat standing up at the kitchen table. It is warm in the kitchen. The fire is low. It's been left to burn down for the night. But the residual heat is real and immediate, and after the hours of cold outside, the kitchen feels almost lavish. You eat the soup and the bread, and then you cut another slice and eat that too, because you're hungry enough to eat 3 more and haven't the right to. One of the other lodgers comes through the kitchen while you're there. A young man you've seen before but not spoken to. A printer's apprentice by the look of his hands, with ink permanently worked into the lines of his knuckles. He nods at you, takes an apple from a bowl on the shelf, leaves again without comment. Normal. This is a normal thing that happens in the kitchen of a lodging house. People come and go and take what's theirs and don't remark on each other. You have lived among strangers for 14 months. You have learned that the privacy of strangers is a kind of gift. The gift of not having to explain yourself, not having to perform yourself, not having to be legible to anyone. You can be tired and worried and wearing an inside-out glove and a parish badge and still, in this kitchen, just be a woman eating soup at the end of a long day. Nobody requires anything of you right now. That is, improbably, enough. Upstairs, Mrs. Flood is in bed, turned to the wall, her breathing slow and even. You undress quietly in the dark, folding each piece of clothing in the way you always fold it, the way Mrs. Pemberton's household taught you, efficiency and order in small spaces. You work by feel now, in the dark. You know where everything goes. The badge. You unpin it from the gown and hold it for a moment. You could put it in the trunk, at the bottom, under everything, where it won't be the first thing you see when you dress tomorrow. Or you could put it on the windowsill, where you put the things that need to be dealt with and not forgotten. You put it on the windowsill, tomorrow you will sew it to your good apron properly with neat stitches, because if you're going to wear a thing, you're going to wear it correctly. That's bearing. That's the fundamental skill. You get into bed. Mrs. Flood is warm. This is one of the small, strange graces of the shared bed. The warmth of another body, unconscious and unnegotiated, available simply because you are both there. In Shrewsbury you had your own room and your own bed and your own cold, and here you have this instead. The church bell somewhere distant strikes 8, then 9, then 10. You have been awake for 17 hours and have walked, by rough calculation, 6 miles. Your feet ache. Your shoulders ache from the cold. Your eyes are dry. But your mind is not quiet yet. Here is what you're thinking about. You're thinking about Margaret Beale on her overturned pail, with her stack of matches and her 15 years on Monmouth Street, and her careful, unsentimental knowledge of who lives in which room and where Mrs. Carver is, and when the vestry is fair and when it isn't. You are thinking about Mrs. Hartley listing her belongings in a voice completely without inflection. You're thinking about the young woman pressing her face into her baby's hair. You're thinking about what it takes to stay in a city that is trying, in its particular casual way, not to kill you, but simply not to notice you enough to help you, which in practical terms amounts to the same thing. And you are thinking about something else, something that has been with you all day and that you have been, with some effort, not looking at directly. The footman on the steps at St. James's Square, the way his eyes passed over you. Not the man himself. You don't care about the man himself. But what his eyes were doing and what that meant. He was using the same skill you use, the same quick assessment, the same placement of a person in the social geography of a moment. He used it on you and found you on the wrong side of the line, and his eyes passed on. You've done that to people. You've stood in the position of the woman who passed you and saw the badge and looked away. You've been the one with something to lose, reading the room, placing people, placing yourself above them without thinking about it. You've done it in Mrs. Pemberton's household when the cook's girl came into the upper rooms with a question, and you'd felt that flicker of, not contempt, nothing so crude, just the quick automatic registering of the distance between you, the distance that looked like nothing from where you stood, the distance that, from where the cook's girl stood, probably looked like everything. You think about that for a while in the dark. Outside, the city continues its night. You can hear it from up here, faintly. The tavern down the street, a wash of sound that ebbs and flows with the opening and closing of a door. A watchman calling the hour somewhere far off, his voice thin and high in the cold air. The sound of a cart on cobbles, then nothing. Then the soft sound of something that might be rain beginning, the first tentative tap of drops on the small window. Rain. February rain in London, which is not really rain so much as the sky releasing a thin cold mist of water that soaks through wool and finds the back of your neck and runs down inside your collar and is frankly a personal insult. But you are inside. You are inside, in a bed, with a roof over your head, and bread in your stomach, and 8p in your pocket, and the practical knowledge that on Wednesday you will receive 1 shilling and 3p, and that on Monday you will go to Mrs. Carver's blue door and show her your needle and thread and see what happens. This is what survives when everything else is stripped away. The next thing you can do. Mrs. Flood stirs beside you, shifts, settles again. Her breathing is deep and regular. The rain intensifies slightly, a soft percussion on the window glass. You're warm enough, not comfortable, not safe, in the way that the word safe means secure from further harm. But warm enough, which is different and tonight sufficient. There is a particular arithmetic that you do every night in this bed, and you do it now. Not the money arithmetic, that one you've done already. The other arithmetic. The things that are still in place. Your health, still there. Your hands, which are capable of fine work and which will prove it Monday morning at a blue door. Your knowledge, the hard-won, specific, practical knowledge of a trade, knowledge that nobody can take from you, that lives in your hands and your eyes and your memory, your character reference, still true. Your name, Sarah Hewitt, which no ledger can reassign. The arithmetic comes out the same as always, which is not much, but not nothing. Considerably more than the gin shop woman on the step. Considerably less than the woman in the sedan chair. Somewhere in the vast, unglamorous middle, which is where most people live, in most centuries, in most cities. The rain on the window, the warmth of Mrs. Flood's back 6 inches away. The church bell, very distant, striking 11. You close your eyes, and for a moment, just for a moment, in the warmth and the dark and the sound of the rain, you allow yourself to not be managing, not calculating, not presenting, not bearing, just tired. Just a person in a bed in a city in February, tired from a long day of trying, tired from 14 months of trying, tired in the specific and genuine way of someone who has not yet stopped and who will not stop, but who is, right now, in this moment, allowed to rest. This is the part they don't tell you about in Shrewsbury. Not the size of the city, not the smell, not the speed of it, or the noise or the particular cold of a London winter. Those things you can imagine, roughly, if you've been told. They don't tell you about the effort, the daily, constant, invisible effort of being poor in a world that is organised around the assumption that you are not there, or that if you are there as a problem to be managed rather than a person to be seen. The effort of keeping the apron clean, the effort of walking past the bread, the effort of sitting in a cold room while a man who has never missed a meal makes notes about what you own, the effort of pinning a badge to your chest and squaring your shoulders and walking out of a churchyard into a street that does not notice you, because noticing you is not required. That effort is exhausting, and nobody will ever give you credit for it. Not the vestry man, not the clerk at the registry, not the footman on the steps, whose own effort, the practiced stillness, the correct uniform, the waiting, nobody gives him credit for either. This is one of the things the city teaches you. Work that is invisible is still work. You think about Margaret Beale's 15 years. 15 years on Monmouth Street. 15 years of knowing which room Mrs. Flood is in, and which vestry official is fair, and where the woman who does alterations lives. That knowledge took 15 years to build. You've been here 14 months. You have 12 years and 10 months of building left to do. This is paradoxically not a discouraging thought. It is a concrete one. It tells you that what you don't know yet is learnable, that the city can be learned, piece by piece, the way you learned Mrs. Pemberton's wardrobe, methodically, practically, by touch. You can learn this city. You've already started. The rain is steady now, a soft, even sound on the glass without malice. Just rain. The kind of rain that, if you were warm inside and didn't have to go out in it, you might find companionable. The kind of rain that makes the inside feel more inside. You are warm inside, just now, just for tonight. Mrs. Flood breathes. Somewhere below, the argument has finally stopped, resolved or abandoned, and the house is quiet. The church bell doesn't strike. You've lost count of the hour. It doesn't matter. Tomorrow is Wednesday. No, Thursday. Tomorrow is Thursday. Wednesday is when you go to the overseer's office. Thursday you can go to Mrs. Carver's blue door. 2 days. 2 days is a manageable distance. Here is something that will happen that you don't know yet. Thursday morning you will stand at Mrs. Carver's blue door and knock, and a woman in her 50s with needle-pricked fingers and sharp eyes will open it and look at you, and you will say, "Margaret Beale sent me." And she will say, "Can you do fine work?" And you will say yes, and she will take you inside and put a needle and thread and a piece of silk in your hands and watch you hem 6 inches of it. You will hem it perfectly, tiny, even stitches, the silk not puckering, the thread vanishing into the fabric. She will look at it for a moment. She will hand it back to you. Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, she'll say, 6 in the morning to 4 in the afternoon. 3p a day. 3p a day, 3 days a week, 9p a week, in addition to the parish shilling and 3p. Enough, not much, but enough. You don't know this yet. But something in you, lying in this dark, knows that the ledger is not closed. You are warm enough, fed enough, present enough, still in this city, still here, still accounting for yourself. Outside, the rain continues its soft, indifferent conversation with the window glass. The London winter rain, grey and cold and carrying the smell of smoke and the river, and the particular smell of 10,000 chimneys, all breathing at once into air that has been breathed before, many times by many people, and is still breathable, still useful, still sufficient. Everything that has happened today has happened. The registry office and the pawnbroker and the cold room and the vestry, and Mr. Croft's voice, even and careful, and the weight of the badge in your hand. The vestryman's almost smile. Margaret Beale's matches and her 15 years of specific knowledge. The soup in the kitchen and the bread. All of it happened, and all of it is still happening, in the way that days don't stop when you lie down but simply continue in your body. In the ache of your feet, the tightness across your shoulders, the pleasant heaviness of your eyelids. You've earned this. Not the badge, not the situation, not the inside-out gloves, but this warm dark, this rest. Take it. Somewhere centuries from now, in a city that will have grown past London like a thing growing past its old skin, there will be people lying in warm rooms, listening to someone describe a day in February 1743, trying to understand it, maybe recognizing something, the arithmetic of what you have, the inventory of what remains, the particular exhaustion of showing up correctly day after day in a world that is not designed for you. Those people will have their own Monmouth Streets, their own registries, their own kinds of document that pin something to your chest where everyone can see it. The details change. The arithmetic doesn't. What doesn't change is this. People kept trying. Sarah Hewitt, on a Thursday morning in February 1743, walked to a blue door on a side street and knocked and said, "Margaret Beale sent me," and hemmed 6 inches of silk and was given 3 days of work. And then she went home and put the 8p away and boiled water for washing and cleaned her apron in cold water with cheap soap and hung it to dry overnight, and the next morning pressed it flat with a heated stone, because the apron is always clean. Bearing. The fundamental skill, not looking away, not stopping. Thursday morning comes the way February mornings come, without apology, without gentleness, without any of the qualities that would make it easier to leave the warmth of the bed. The coughing woman has been quiet all night. This is, you realize when you wake, the first night she hasn't coughed since sometime in December. The silence where the coughing was is its own kind of sound. You dress in the dark, same order as always. Shift, stays, stockings, petticoats, gown. The apron, dry now, pressed flat by the weight of the water it absorbed while drying on the line above the kitchen fire, which is almost as good as being ironed in low light at a distance. You pin it in place. The badge on the windowsill, grey morning light falls on it at an angle. The stitching is adequate but not careful. Done quickly, done in quantity, done by someone who had no reason to do it well. You look at it for a moment. Then you take it and pin it to the apron, just above and slightly right of centre. The pin goes through cleanly. You adjust it until it sits level. If you're going to wear a thing, you're going to wear it correctly. Cap or gloves, you go downstairs. Mrs. Carver's blue door is where Margaret said it would be. Second house on the right, paint faded to the colour of a clear winter sky, a brass knocker in the shape of a hand. You knock at 10 minutes to 6. The door opens almost immediately, as though she'd been waiting. Mrs. Carver is 53 years old, you will learn, though she looks older. The kind of older that comes from very close work in inadequate light, which has given her a habitual squint and lines running from the corners of her eyes like the spread of a hand. Her hair is iron grey, pulled back with a practicality that suggests she cut off caring about its appearance some years ago, and has not regretted it since. Her hands, when she holds them out to take your coat, are covered in small scars, the particular evidence of a life spent with needles, which find their way into the pads of fingers and the webs between them with the casual regularity of hazards that are simply part of the trade. She looks at you. Her eyes do the same quick inventory yours do: dress, posture, hands, face. Her eyes pause at the badge, not unkindly, just noting it. Margaret Beale sent me, you say. I know who Margaret sent. She told me yesterday. She steps back to let you in. Can you do fine work? Yes, we'll see. Inside, the workroom is the front room of the house, its window facing north, the right direction for sewing, the light coming from above and to the side, not changing with the sun, steady enough to work by from morning to late afternoon. 2 large tables. Shelves along the walls with bolts of fabric organised by colour and weight. A fireplace, small, with a coal fire burning, enough to keep the room above freezing, not enough to make you warm. A chair at each table. A girl of about 12 is already at the right-hand table, her head bent over a piece of work, her needle moving with the careful rhythm of someone who has been taught correctly. She looks up when you come in. She has a round, careful face and the same squint as Mrs. Carver, though hers is new and might not yet be permanent. This is Jenny, Mrs. Carver says. She doesn't talk much while she's working. I'd suggest you follow her example. She puts the silk in your hands, 6 inches of it, cut from a length of pale grey silk that costs, you estimate from the weight and the weave, somewhere between 3 and 4 shillings per yard. You take it to the left-hand table by the light. Thread a needle with the thread she hands you, white, fine, the right weight for this fabric. You hem it. You don't think about it. Your hands do it. This is the thing about fine work when you've done it long enough. It stops being an act of concentration and becomes an act of memory. Your fingers remember the angle, the pressure, the distance between stitches. The silk doesn't pucker. The stitches go into the fabric and disappear. When you're done, you put it on the table. Mrs. Carver picks it up without comment, holds it to the window light, turns it over. She hands it back to you. Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, she says. 6 in the morning to 4 in the afternoon. 3p a day. Yes, you say. She nods and goes back to her own work at the right-hand table. The room fills with the particular sound of this kind of work, which is almost no sound at all. Thread moving through fabric, the small click of a needle case being opened and closed, the coal fire settling, the girl's breathing steady and concentrated. Outside, Monmouth Street starts its morning. You thread another needle and begin. You work for 3 hours before Mrs. Carver speaks again. Not to you, to the girl. Jenny has made an error in her hem, a slight unevenness in the stitch spacing over a stretch of perhaps 2 inches, and Mrs. Carver stands behind her and points to it without touching it. Take it out. Jenny takes it out. She doesn't sigh or flinch or show any visible response. She just unpicks the stitches with the seam ripper, smooths the fabric, and begins again. You watch this without appearing to watch it. You've been taught not to make errors visible in others, but you've also been taught how to learn from watching. Mrs. Pemberton believed that the best instruction was observation. A good servant, she said, never needed to be told twice, because a good servant was always watching. You look at your own work. A stretch of about 4 inches in the lower left corner of the piece in front of you, a length of dark blue wool that will become eventually a pelisse for someone, where your spacing has been almost perfectly even, but not quite. You can see it. The difference is imperceptible to anyone who isn't looking for it, and almost everyone isn't looking for it. But it is there. You take it out. Mrs. Carver doesn't comment on this. She's working on her own piece and appears to be looking at nothing except it. But there is a slight shift in her posture, a fraction of a nod perhaps, that tells you she noticed. You begin again. Mid-morning, Mrs. Carver sets down her work and goes to the back of the house. She returns with a small pot of something, not tea, you discover when she sets a cup in front of you, but a thin grain drink, barley water with a spoonful of treacle stirred in. Hot, slightly sweet. The warmth of it spreads through your hands when you wrap them around the cup. Jenny gets one too. She cradles hers with both hands and drinks quickly, as though afraid it might be taken back. You drink more slowly. Not from equanimity, from the calculation that will stay warm longer if you take it gradually. The blue wool, Mrs. Carver says, not looking at you. What's the piece you're working? A pelisse, I think, or the beginning of one. This looks like the facing on a left front panel. Good. A pause. What's wrong with the fabric? You look down at it. You've been noticing something since about 9 o'clock. A slight stiffness in the weave, a resistance under the needle that isn't quite right for this weight of wool. It's been treated, you say. The nap, raised to look heavier than it is. It'll wear through at the stress points within 2 seasons. Another small silence. Who told you that? A man on this street. Mr. Levi, the second-hand dealer. He showed me the technique about 3 months ago. Mrs. Carver picks up the fabric, feels it between her thumb and forefinger, presses it, releases, watches it spring back. You're right. She sets it down. The household that ordered it sent the material themselves. I've been wondering if I should mention it. You think about this, about the household that sent the material, about the woman who will wear the pelisse, about the difference between mentioning it and not mentioning it, and what it costs each way. Mentioning it is honest, you say. Not mentioning it means they come back in 2 years and blame the workmanship. Mrs. Carver looks at you for the first time since the morning's assessment. Yes, she says. She drinks her barley water. The fire settles. You're from a lady's maid's background, she says. Yes. That's useful. For knowing materials. Not so useful for everything else in this work. A pause. Ladies' maids don't spend much time on plain hems. No, but I can learn. You already know the principles. The learning is just practice. She sets down her cup. The vestry has you on out relief. Yes. How long? 12 weeks. Then review. She nods, not commenting on it, just placing it in the larger picture she's assembling of you, the way she assembles pieces of cloth. In 12 weeks, she says, if the work is consistent, I might have more days for you. She picks up her needle. The conversation is over. You pick up yours. At 12:30, Jenny puts on her outer coat and leaves. School, Mrs. Carver explains without elaboration. The girl comes in the mornings before school and has an arrangement with the schoolmaster about the hours, which tells you something about the schoolmaster and something about the school, and a great deal about Mrs. Carver. You keep working alone. The workroom is quiet in a different way without Jenny. More spacious somehow, even though Jenny is small and takes up very little of the room. There's the absence of her careful breathing. Around 2 o'clock the light shifts, the grey February sky deepening, and you light the tallow candle on the table, beside you without being asked. The smell of it is particular, that sweetish, slightly animal smell of rendered fat, and you are so used to it that it barely registers. It registers as working light, as winter afternoon, as keep going, you keep going. At 4 o'clock, Mrs. Carver says, that's the day, without looking up, and you set down your work and flex your hands. Your fingers ache. Not badly. You've worked longer hours than this. But the specific ache of fine work which lives in the joints and the tendons, the accumulated evidence of small repeated movements. You count the day's work. 6 inches of wool hem completed and correct. 1 sleeve lining basted. 2/3 of an embroidered collar. The pattern copied from a paper template Mrs. Carver pinned to the table. Mrs. Carver counts out 3p. She places the coins on the table's edge. Monday, she says. Monday, you say. You take the 3p. You put on your coat and your inside-out gloves and your straight cap. Outside, the afternoon is going dark, that early February dark that arrives before you've prepared for it. The street is busy with the end-of-day rush. People heading home, vendors packing up, the coal cart making its final deliveries, the lamplighter just beginning his rounds. You have 3p. You have a Monday to come back to. You walk home. 3 weeks pass, then 4. You go to Mrs. Carver on Mondays, Wednesdays and Fridays. You collect from the overseer on Wednesdays at 10 o'clock. 1 shilling and 3p, given to you by a different clerk each time. A small mercy of anonymity. You pay Mr. Jarvis his rent, which has been reduced from 1 shilling to 8p now that you're sharing Mrs. Flood's bed fully, rather than being assigned the second bed. A reduction in circumstance that is also a reduction in expense, which is one of the stranger mathematics of poverty. Mrs. Flood talks to you sometimes in the early mornings before you leave. She has a daughter in Shoreditch whom she sees on Sundays when she can manage the walk, which is becoming increasingly difficult. Her hands are failing faster than she had hoped. She is saving, penny by penny, against the day when they fail completely. What happens then, you don't ask. The question is too heavy for a morning conversation. You talk about other things, about the street, about Mrs. Carver's work. which Mrs. Flood finds interesting in the practical way of someone who spent her own life in a trade, about the fabric you're working with, its origins and quality. Mrs. Flood knows things about cloth that you don't. Not the fine work knowledge of a lady's maid, but the industry knowledge of someone who worked in the trade, who handled fabric before it was finished, who knows how it moves from raw material to completed textile, and what happens to people at each stage. The weaver's in Spitalfields, she tells you one morning, while you're both dressing, her hands moving slowly over her buttons. Silk weavers, the good ones, used to be the finest trade in London. Now the French stuff comes in on the ships, and it's cheaper, and it's good quality, and it's killing them. I've seen the silk Mrs. Carver uses sometimes, you say. It's French, I think. It is. You can tell by the density. Her voice is even, not bitter, just factual. Those Spitalfields men put their sons in the trade, and now the sons have nothing. The whole district's going another way. It happens. A pause. It happened to me, she adds pleasantly. Different reason, different trade, but it happens. She buttons her last button, looks in the mirror. You'll be all right, she says. Not as reassurance, as observation. You will, she says again. You've got the right kind of stubbornness. You don't ask what the wrong kind of stubbornness looks like. You think you know. On the second Wednesday of March, something happens. It is an ordinary Wednesday morning, the kind March sometimes produces. Cold, clear, with a quality of light that is not quite spring but is no longer entirely winter. A suggestion, a preliminary. You're on your way to the overseer's office when you take a slightly different route. Not from any particular reason, just from the small human need to sometimes walk down a street you haven't walked down recently. You turn south, where you usually turn north and come out on a wider road that runs toward the Foundling Hospital. The Foundling Hospital. If you know anything about it, you know it opened about 2 years ago, 1741. Thomas Corum's great project, the Hospital for Abandoned Children, built on land north of Holborn. The building is new, the grounds still being arranged, the institution still establishing its routines. You know that women leave babies at the gate. You know that the babies are given numbers and names, and that the original names, if the original names are known, are recorded in a sealed ledger that the child cannot access. You know that the children are raised there and educated there and apprenticed out from there. You pass by on the outside of the iron gate and you look in. The grounds are neat. That deliberate neatness of an institution that understands it will be judged by its appearance. Paths raked clear. Lawns trimmed despite the season. The main building at the far end, brick, 2 wings extending forward like arms. Children. You can see them from the gate. A group of perhaps 20, outdoors despite the cold, in the care of a woman who is moving them from one part of the grounds to another in a purposeful way. They're dressed in uniforms, brown and white, simple and well made. They walk in a line which children that age resist naturally, and these children do not. They have learned not to. The children are wearing something. You look harder. Numbers. Each child wears a number, a small badge of cloth, pinned in the same position as your letter. An identification mark, not a social category like not pauper, not poor. Just, you belong to this institution. You stand at the gate in the March cold for longer than you meant to. You think about what it means to be marked. These children are marked in a way that is meant to organize them, to make them legible to the institution that is responsible for them. Your badge marks you as a recipient of public charity. which is also in its way about being made legible to the institution, made countable, made manageable. The difference is that these children didn't choose it, can't choose against it. The mark is what they are entirely, because it is the only identity they have. No family name, no history that anyone will confirm, just a number and a uniform and the careful organisation of their days by people who mean well and may or may not be right about what meaning well requires. You chose to come to London. You can choose to leave. This is the difference. It is small and enormous at the same time. The woman supervising the children turns and sees you at the gate. She looks at you for a moment, takes in your dress, your badge, your face. She doesn't wave you off or move toward you. She simply looks and then turns back to the children. You step back from the gate. You continue to the overseer's office. The clerk at the overseer's office this Wednesday is the same young clerk from your first examination. He recognises you, shows it in a slight readjustment of his posture, not unfriendly. He counts out your shilling and threepence. No changes to your circumstances? The standard question. I have work, you say. 3 days a week with an alteration and repair establishment, threepence a day. He makes a note. You watch the pen move. That's good, he says, and the word good has a quality in it that is genuine. Not official, not performed, just good. Does it affect the relief, you ask? At this level, no. The threshold for reduction is... He names a figure, a weekly income above which the relief decreases. You're below it. We'll reassess at the 12-week mark. Yes, thank you. He gives you the coins. You fold them into your pocket. Outside, the March light is doing something tentative with the rooftops across the street, catching the chimney tops, suggesting warmth without providing it. You walk to Mrs. Carver's. April. The spring arrives in London the way spring always arrives in London. Gradually, then suddenly, and then retreated, and then genuinely. In April, for the first time since November, the mornings are sometimes bearable before the sun is up. The quality of the cold changes, it loses its personal malice, becomes simply temperature rather than adversary. The washing dries faster. The windows of the lodging house accumulate less condensation. The smell of the street, which in winter is dense and static, begins to move again, dispersed by the occasional actual wind, by the opening of windows that have been shut since October. You wash your hair on a Tuesday and it dries by. Wednesday morning. A small thing. Not a small thing. Mrs. Carver gives you a 4th day in the 3rd week of April. A Tuesday, not regular. When the work warrants it, she says. But in the last week of April it happens twice, which makes 2 weeks in a row where you earn a penny more than expected. You put the extra pennies in the tin box with your papers. Mrs. Flood sees you do it. Good habit, she says. You taught me, you say. She had, in fact. Not directly, but in watching her, in the way she counted every coin twice before it left her hand, in the way she knew exactly, always, the weight of what she had. She had taught you that poverty was not incompatible with precision, that having very little was not the same as being careless with what you had. I didn't teach you anything, she says. You came with it. I came with stubbornness, apparently. She laughs. Her laugh, when it comes, is completely at odds with her general economy of expression. Large, unexpectedly warm, filling the small room. Same thing, she says. May. May in London is the month when the city becomes briefly beautiful in spite of itself. Not everywhere. Not Monmouth Street, which smells, in May, like everything it smelled in February, plus the addition of heat, which amplifies every existing odour. Not the narrow courts where the gin shops operate, which are the same in May as in every other month because poverty is the most consistent climate. But on the wider streets, the market gardens east of the city send their product in, and the stalls around Covent Garden are stacked with things that are green and alive and were recently part of the ground. Asparagus and early peas and the first salad stuffs and flowers, which the women sell in bunches from baskets. The flowers brilliant and temporary and absolutely alive. You buy flowers once. It is a penny for 3 stems of something yellow. You don't know what they are just yellow. And you carry them home and put them in the cup from which you drink your evening water. And Mrs. Flood looks at them for a long time without saying anything. Pretty, she says finally. They last 4 days. You buy them again the following week. A different colour, purple. Mrs. Flood laughs again. In the second week of May, something happens at the registry office. A position. Not a lady's maid position. Not yet, not again, maybe not for a long time. But a parlour maid's position in a house in Bloomsbury, the household of a barrister and his wife. A respectable household, 2 children, 1 other maid. The work, cleaning the public rooms, serving at table, answering the door. Below your training. Not below what you need. The clerk at the registry, the same one who told you to consider your options, hands you the card with the household's address and says they'd like to see you Thursday at 10. You take the card. Thursday at 10, 4 days. On Wednesday, you go to the overseer's office for your 9th weekly payment. The clerk counts out the money. Any changes? I have an interview for a position, you say. Thursday, a parlour maid's position in Bloomsbury. He makes a note, looks up. If you take the position, you'll need to inform us. The relief will cease. Yes, you say. I know. He looks at you for a moment with an expression that is carefully official, and underneath it something that might be hope, or might be the professional satisfaction of a man who processes many cases and sees very few of them resolved positively. Good luck, he says. You put the money in your pocket. Outside, on the street, you take the vestry note from where you've been keeping it. Not against your stays any more, but in the tin box with your papers, and you fold it again along its existing creases, and you put it back. You keep walking. On Wednesday evening, Margaret Beale is on her corner. She is always on her corner. The warmth of May has made the evening outside different. It is not yet dark at 7 o'clock. The sky still holding a deep blue at the edges, and she sits on her upturned pail with the relaxed quality of someone who is, for the first time in months, genuinely comfortable. I have an interview, you tell her. She looks at you. Parlour-maid, Bloomsbury. She considers this. She's quiet for a moment in the way of someone who has opinions and is deciding which of them to share. Good household? I don't know yet. I'll know Thursday. Bloomsbury's respectable. She holds up her matches. A man passing slows down and buys a bundle. She gives him change from a pocket you cannot see. It's not what you were. No. Is that all right? You think about this. Genuinely think about it. Standing on Monmouth Street in the May evening with the smell of the street around you and the blue sky above the rooftops and the question, which is a real question and deserves a real answer. You were a lady's maid. You understood quality. You could identify silk from 3 paces and assess the integrity of a seam in seconds and dress a woman's hair in any of 4 styles. You had a position that was, in the hierarchy of domestic service, respectable. Not high, not the housekeeper or the governess, but respectable. Above the kitchen, above the laundry. A parlourmaid answers the door. A parlourmaid carries coals. It's a position, you say. Margaret looks at you with her clear, steady eyes. It's a start, she says, which is what you meant and stated better. Yes. She hands you a match. You didn't buy one. I know. She presses it into your hand. For luck. You look at the match. A small stick. Sulphur tip. Unremarkable. Thank you, you say. She waves you off. Go home. Get some sleep. You'll want to look your best on Thursday. Thursday morning. The apron is pressed. The dress is the best one. The dark blue wool that you've brushed carefully, working with the nap so the slightly shiny elbows are less visible. The cap is the clean one, no discoloration. The gloves. You hold them for a moment. Then you take them off. You put the right one on correctly. The split is visible now on the outside, the sewn seam thick at the index finger. You look at it. You put the left one on. If you're going to present yourself as someone ready to work in a household, you are going to present yourself honestly. Not the inside-out version, the actual version. The version that includes a split in the right glove and a badge on your apron, and the knowledge that you have been on Monmouth Street for 17 months and you have been to the overseer's office 9 times, and you have hemmed more fabric than you can measure, and you owe no one anything, and you've kept the apron clean. That is who is going to the interview. You take the badge off the apron and look at it. You put it back on. The badge is part of the true version, not a thing to hide, a thing that happened, a thing that is happening, a fact, like the glove. You square your shoulders. You look in the mirror. What you see is a woman who is 21 years old and has been in London for 17 months and is walking to an interview in Bloomsbury for a position that is below her training and is, nevertheless, a position. What the mirror cannot show you is everything else, but you know it's there. You go downstairs. Mrs. Flood is at the table with her breakfast, bread and small beer, her daily ration, which she eats in small bites with the patience of someone whose jaw also sometimes troubles her now. She looks at you. She looks at you the way a woman looks at someone she has shared a bed with for 4 months, which is entirely differently from how anyone else looks at you, without the evaluation, without the inventory, just directly. You look right, she says. That is the whole of it. You say goodbye. You walk out into the May morning. Bloomsbury is 20 minutes from Monmouth Street on foot. 20 minutes and another world, though less extreme than the jump from St. Giles to St. James's. Bloomsbury is the world of the professional classes, barristers, physicians, men of letters, clergymen with comfortable livings, merchants who have made enough money to want an address that sounds well, respectable without being fashionable, solid without being grand. The streets are cleaner, not clean. No London street in 1743 is clean, but cleaner. The houses are newer and better maintained. There are actual footpaths on some of the streets, raised slightly above the road surface, paved with flat stones, where you can walk without sharing space with horses. The house in Bloomsbury is a 4-storey terraced house in a short street of similar houses. Brick. White stone around the windows and door. A boot scraper at the base of the front steps, which tells you something about the household's expectations for cleanliness. You do not use the front door. You go around to the left to the area steps that lead down to the kitchen entrance. You knock. The woman who opens the door is the other maid. You recognise this instantly, in the same way she recognises you. Young, broadly built, with a competent face and the capable hands of someone who's been doing physical work since she was 10. She looks at you, looks at the badge. She doesn't say anything about it. Interview, she asks. Yes, 10 o'clock. Right. She stands back. Come in. The kitchen is warm and smells of breakfast. Bacon grease, hot bread, the acid brightness of something being boiled in a copper pot for reasons you can't immediately identify. Clean, or as clean as a working kitchen is at 10 in the morning, which is organised, functional, actively occupied. The cook is a woman of perhaps 45, standing at the range with the expression of someone managing several things at once, which she is. Sit there, she says, gesturing to a chair near the door without looking up. Mrs. Hayward will be down in a minute. You sit. You put your hands in your lap. You wait. The sounds of the household assemble around you. Upstairs, the particular sound of children, feet on floorboards, a door, a high voice saying something that ends in a question mark. The creak of the staircase, the muffled sound of a man's voice from somewhere toward the front of the house, the barrister, perhaps, in his study. The other maid moving through the kitchen, collecting things from shelves. You look at your hands, the right glove, on correctly, the split visible at the index finger, the badge. These things are facts. You hear the staircase again, lighter this time, and then a door at the back of the kitchen opens and a woman comes in who is the mistress of the house, not dressed yet for the street, in a plain morning wrapper, which tells you she's comfortable in her own kitchen. 40 perhaps, dark-haired. A face that is ordinary in the best way. Nothing remarkable in it except the quality of her attention, which is genuine and direct. She looks at you. Miss Hewitt. Yes, ma'am. I'm Mrs. Hayward. She takes the chair across from you and sits with the matter-of-fact ease of the woman who has no pretensions about where interviews happen. I've looked at your reference. Mrs. Pemberton's from Shrewsbury. Yes, ma'am. Lady's maid. Yes, ma'am. You're applying for a parlour-maid position. Yes, ma'am. She looks at you steadily, and you look back at her, and what passes between you is not a battle of wills. It is something more specific. It is an honest look at an honest situation, and both of you can see what the situation is, and neither of you is pretending it's something else. You're on parish relief, she says. Yes, ma'am. Out relief from St. Giles. I'm also doing alteration and repair work 3 days a week for Mrs. Carver on Monmouth Street. She'll give a reference if required. Mrs. Hayward takes this in. How long on the relief? 9 weeks. How long in London total? 17 months. A pause. Why hasn't a lady's maid found a lady's maid position in 17 months? The question is direct and deserves a direct answer, and you give it one. Because a lady's maid needs a particular household, one with a mistress who wants a personal attendant above the level of a household maid and without an existing arrangement. Those positions exist, but they're rarely advertised. They come through personal recommendation. I came to London on a character reference from a dead woman's household, which doesn't generate the kind of recommendations that fill those positions. I have applied to registries consistently. The available positions at my level have either required a recommendation I can't provide or have gone to women already known to the household. Mrs. Hayward looks at her hands for a moment, then back at you. You're overqualified for a parlour maid. I'm unqualified for nothing else currently available, ma'am. Something in her expression shifts. Not quite a smile. The precursor to a smile. What can you actually do? You tell her. You tell her everything. The wardrobe management, the accounts, the hair, the sewing, the fine work, the way you can read fabric by touch, the suppliers you know and the ones you've learned to distrust, the particular knowledge of a woman who spent 17 months learning London from the ground level rather than from a carriage window. You tell her about Mrs. Carver and the hemming and the collar embroidery and the fact that in 4 months you've not been late and not produced work that needed correcting more than once. You tell her about the glove. Not in those words. But you put your right hand on the table and you say, I want to be transparent with you, Mum. This is where I am. This is what I have. I can do the work of a parlour maid, and I will do it correctly, and I will be reliable. If a position opens above that level, I'd hope to be considered for it. But I'm not asking for more than what's on offer. Mrs. Hayward looks at your hand on the table, looks at the glove, looks at the badge. My previous parlour maid, she says, left in February to be married. She was adequate and honest, and those are the 2 things I need. I don't particularly need someone who can dress hair. No, Mum. I do occasionally need someone who can manage the household accounts when I'm occupied. Can you do that? Yes, ma'am. She stands. The position pays £4 a year plus board and keep. You'd have the small room at the top, 2nd floor back, 1 Sunday afternoon off per fortnight. She pauses. Can you start Monday? The room is warm. The smells of the kitchen are the smells of a working household, of food being made and floors being cleaned and fires being kept. Monday. Yes, Mum, you say. Good. She goes to the door, pauses, looks back at you. The badge. Yes, Mum. You'll need to inform the parish when your position changes. Yes, Mum, I know. And you'll need to... She stops, looks at the badge again, and at your face, and something moves through her expression that is, you think, something close to recognition. Well, Monday, then, she leaves. The cook says nothing, still managing a range. The other maid has gone upstairs. You sit in the chair for a moment. £4 a year, board and keep. A room. You breathe in. You breathe out. The cook sets a cup of something on the table near you without comment. Hot. Tea. Actual tea, which you haven't drunk in months. Drink that before you go, she says. You drink it. You walk home through Bloomsbury in the May morning, the kind of morning that will not last because spring in London is unreliable, but which is right now exactly what it is. Warm and clear and carrying the smell of bread from a baker on the corner and the sound of children from somewhere and the general noise of a city at full mid-morning volume. You have a position. You have a position that starts Monday and pays £4 a year and includes a room that is yours, a room that does not contain Mrs. Flood's camphor smell or the coughing woman's cough or the sound of the lodging house building thinking about falling over. You walk past the man who sells chestnuts. He has switched from chestnuts to something else now that it's May. Small early strawberries, brilliant red in little paper cones. You buy one, 3p. The strawberries are warm from sitting in the sun, and they taste like the first thing in 5 months that is not managed and careful and calculated. They taste like May. You eat them walking. Mr. Jarvis is in his room when you return. He looks up when you come in. I'm giving notice, you say. I have a position. I'll be leaving Sunday. He looks at you for a moment. Bloomsbury, you say. Good address, he says. Good. He makes an entry in his ledger. I'll refund the balance of the week, he says. You don't need... I'll refund the balance, he says, in the tone of a man who's been letting a room for 20 years and has a precise sense of what is fair. He counts out threepence and puts it on the desk. You take it. You look at his face, the careful face of a man extending reasonable credit to people and sometimes being paid back. Thank you, you say, for the time you waited on the rent. He looks slightly uncomfortable, the way careful people do when acknowledged for their care. You paid me back, he says, which is the whole of it for him. Upstairs, Mrs. Flood is in the room mending a stocking with her stiff fingers. She looks up when you come in. You tell her. She puts down the stocking. She looks at you for a long moment. Good, she says. Just that. Just good. In the same tone she uses for all decisive things. Then she picks up the stocking again and keeps mending it. You sit on the edge of the bed and help her, taking the needle when her hands cramp, continuing the work, passing it back when she is ready. This is something you've done half a dozen times in 4 months, an entirely unofficial arrangement, a small practical kindness. You don't talk much. Outside, the May afternoon does its May afternoon things. I'll leave you the flowers, you say at some point. She looks at the cup with the purple stems, the second batch, fading now. Get new ones before you go, she says, fresh. I'll get yellow ones. They lasted longer. Yellow then. On Friday evening, your last Friday on Monmouth Street, you go to Margaret Beale on her corner. She already knows. She knows because she knows everything that happens on this street, and the fact that you are leaving is a thing that will have travelled from Mrs. Carver, who you told on Friday morning, to 3 or 4 people in between, to Margaret's ears in approximately 4 hours. Bloomsbury, she says, Bloomsbury. Parlour-maid. Parlour-maid. She looks at you. One of her long, clear looks. You'll be all right, she says. You said that in February. I say it when it's true. You reach into your pocket. You have the match she gave you 3 weeks ago still there. It has travelled with you through 10 days of work at Mrs. Carver's and 2 vestry payments, and 1 interview, and the May morning strawberries. You put it on the ledge beside her, among her other matches. You'll want that back, you say. She looks at it. I've got more, she says. You take it. She picks it up and puts it in your hand. Light something with it when you get there. First fire you build in your new room. She closes your fingers over it. Her hand is rough, hard-skinned, warm. Make it yours from the start. Sunday afternoon. You pack your trunk for the second time in 17 months. It is heavier than when you arrived, which is a strange thing. You came with almost nothing, and you're leaving with almost nothing, but the almost is different now. The tin box with your papers is heavier. The sewing kit has been supplemented with needles purchased from the market, thread in 4 colours, a thimble bought from a second-hand stall not because it's beautiful, but because it fits correctly and allows you to do fine work without flagging. The gloves, still the same gloves, the badge. You take the badge from the apron. The pinholes are still in the apron where it was attached. Small neat holes in the clean linen, visible if you look for them. You put the badge in the tin box, not because you will need it. You will go to the overseer's office on Monday morning and inform them of your position, and the relief will cease. The badge should go back to the parish. Technically, you put it in the tin box anyway, because it's part of the record, part of the inventory, because if you ever, in any future, need to remember what the full account looks like, you want to be able to open the box and see it. You close the lid. The room in Bloomsbury is on the 2nd floor back, smaller than the room at Mr. Jarvis's, but entirely yours. No partition, no Mrs. Flood, no coughing woman, 1 window facing the yard, a bed with a wool blanket. a chest for your things, a hook on the wall for your coat. The first evening, when Mrs. Hayward has shown you the house, and the other maid has shown you the routine, and the cook has given you supper at the kitchen table. Actual supper, a real piece of meat and potatoes and bread and a small beer. You go upstairs to your room. You close the door. You stand in the middle of the room for a moment. Then you take the match from your pocket. Margaret's match, the one she pressed into your hand on Monmouth Street, and you light the candle on the chest. The flame catches immediately, bright and clean, and the small room fills with its light. You look at the room in candlelight, the pale walls, the window with its view of the yard, the bed with its clean blanket, the hook on the wall, your things in the trunk, your papers in the tin box, the badge in the tin box, the split glove, the needle and thread, the thimble that fits correctly. You blow out the match. You sit on the edge of the bed. Here is what you know at 21 that you did not know at 19 when you stepped off the wagon from Shrewsbury with 3 months' wages and a character reference, and the reasonable expectation of a position within the month. You know that London does not care about your reasonable expectations. London has no mechanism for care. London is a machine for processing people, using what is useful, discarding what isn't, and the machine works at a scale that makes individual experience irrelevant to its operation. You know that this is not the same as there being no help. The help exists in vestry clerks who say good luck and mean it, in lodging housekeepers who wait for rent and return the balance when you leave, in women who sell matches on street corners and know which door to knock on. The help is human-sized, not machine-sized. It operates in the gaps that the machine doesn't fill. You know that respectability is partly real and partly performance, and that keeping the performance up is its own kind of work. Invisible, constant, exhausting, and that nobody will give you credit for the performance, because the performance only succeeds when it looks effortless. You know that the badge, and the letter P, and the vestry note that you kept against your stays for 2 days before your first examination, these things are true facts about your life. And also they are not the whole story, because the whole story includes everything the badge can't see. The hemmed silk, the 3d a day, the tin box with the match, and the thimble and the careful record. You know what it costs to walk out of a churchyard in February with a piece of cloth pinned to your chest and square your shoulders and keep going. You know that the cost is worth paying, because the alternative is not paying it, which means not keeping going, which means the machine wins. The machine does not win, not today, not on Monmouth Street, not in the vestry room, not on the steps at St. James's Square with the footman's empty eyes, not in this room. The candle burns, the house settles around you. The sounds of an occupied house, which are different from the sounds of a lodging house, smaller, more regular, a door, footsteps. Somewhere below, the cook banking the kitchen fire for the night, the particular sound of iron tools on iron grate. Tomorrow you will get up at 5:30. You will dress, same order, same care, apron pressed, cap straight, the right glove on correctly. You will go downstairs and clean the public rooms before the household wakes. You will lay the fires and dust the furniture and set the table for breakfast. You will answer the door when it rings and serve at table when required, and carry coals when the fires need coal. You will do it correctly. You will be reliable and honest and present. That is, in 1743 in London, in the household of a barrister in Bloomsbury, the whole of what is required. It is enough. Outside, the May evening is still light. The sky above the rooftops has gone to that deep particular blue that comes just before the real dark, full of late light, even as the street below goes dim. Somewhere out there Margaret Beale is on her corner. Mrs. Flood is in her partitioned room, her hands slowing, her savings growing penny by penny against the day they stop working. The girl Jenny is at home, or at school, or asleep. The women from the vestry bench, Mrs. Hartley, the young mother with her baby, are somewhere in the city, doing the thing they did yesterday and the day before, the thing they'll do tomorrow. 500,000 people in this city, most of them managing, most of them doing it without anyone noticing, without anyone recording it, without the kind of history that gets written down and read later. Their history lives in the small evidence, in the hem that held, in the rent that was paid, in the apron that stayed clean. The history is this, not the grand buildings, not the merchants at the exchange or the lords in their sedan chairs or the public executions with the commemorative prints. This, a woman in a room with candle, having done what was necessary, having kept what needed keeping. This is what history looks like most of the time for most people. Invisible work, preserved dignity, the next thing, and then the next. Close your eyes. Let the room do what rooms do at the end of a long day. Contract, settle, become the small warm space it was always going to be. Let the city go quiet. Not silent. London doesn't go silent. It was never silent in your lifetime, and it will not be silent in the lifetime of the people listening to this, but quieter. The particular quieter of late evening, when the most urgent business is finished and the rest can wait for tomorrow. You have done enough today, more than enough. The match is burnt, the candle is burning, the trunk is packed, and the trunk is also unpacked, depending on how you look at it. Everything in its place, everything accounted for, the inventory complete. Let sleep come the way sleep comes to someone who has been carrying something heavy and has set it down. Not put it down permanently, not dropped it. Set it down. Tomorrow you will pick it up again. But for now, just for now, it is down. You are warm. You are fed. You are here, in this room, with your name and your work and your gloves and your badge in the tin box and the match extinguished and the record in order. Centuries will pass, and this room will be other rooms, and this city will be another city, and the streets you walked will be other streets walked by other feet. But someone will sit in a room at the end of a day like this one and do the same arithmetic, the same inventory, the same accounting of what remains, what holds, what is enough. Some things don't change. The weight of work that nobody sees, the cost of keeping the apron clean, the particular warmth of having in the end earned the room you're in. You earn this. Let the candle go. Let the last of the light dissolve. Let your hands open in the dark. Good night.